This isn't just a story about bad customer service on a flight. This is the story of a single 5-minute decision that vaporized a $180 million tech contract. It's about the moment a flight attendant's quiet prejudice collided with a silent giant of the tech world, a man who moves markets with a single email. She thought she was removing a problem from her first-class cabin. What she actually did was detonate a corporate bomb that would shatter her own life, topple a CEO, and force one of America's biggest airlines to its knees. Stick with us, because the karma in this story isn't just harsh, it's surgically precise. The hum of the engines was a familiar lullaby to Marcus Thorne. As CEO of Aegis Dynamics, a company at the bleeding edge of AI-driven cybersecurity, the inside of a plane was practically his second office. He was flying Starlight Airlines, Flight 88, from San Francisco SFO to New York, JFK, a routine trip. But today was different. Today he felt a quiet satisfaction. In his briefcase, secured with biometric locks of his own company's design, was a signed agreement. It was the culmination of 6 months of brutal negotiations, a $180 million contract to overhaul Starlight Airlines' entire digital infrastructure, from their archaic booking system to their vulnerable cybersecurity and their laughably outdated in-flight entertainment. Aegis Dynamics was going to bring them into the 21st century. Marcus wasn't flashy. At 42, he had nothing to prove with his wardrobe. He wore what was comfortable for a long flight, a simple dark grey hoodie from a small tech conference, comfortable joggers, and a pair of high-end but understated sneakers. His watch, a sleek black device of his own company's make, was worth more than most cars, but it didn't scream wealth. It whispered capability. He was reading a well-worn paperback copy of a classic sci-fi novel, a guilty pleasure that helped his over-caffeinated brain switch off. He was in seat 2A, a plush pod-like suite in the coveted first-class cabin. He had settled in, accepted a glass of water, and was looking forward to 5 hours of uninterrupted peace. That peace was about to be broken by Brenda Jensen. Brenda was a senior flight attendant with over 20 years of service at Starlight Airlines. She carried herself with an air of proprietary ownership over the first-class cabin. To her, this wasn't just a section of a plane. It was her domain, a sanctuary of exclusivity she was sworn to protect. She prided herself on recognizing her regulars, the titans of finance, the silver-haired senators, the impeccably dressed celebrities. When she saw Marcus, her internal alarm bells, corroded by years of unspoken bias, began to ring. He didn't fit her mental image of a first-class passenger. The hoodie, the joggers. He wasn't on his phone barking orders. He was quietly reading a book. Her eyes narrowed. He must be an upgrade, she thought dismissively. Probably a low-level employee using a corporate pass. She breezed past him with a practiced plastic smile, her attention landing on the man in seat 3C, a Mr. Davenport. He was in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair, a crisp suit, and the loud, confident voice of someone used to being obeyed. Brenda's service became a performance. "Mr. Davenport, so wonderful to have you back with us." She cooed, her voice several notes higher. "Can I get you started with your usual Glenlivet 18, or perhaps a glass of our Dom Perignon today?" "Brenda, you have the memory of an elephant," he boomed. "The scotch will be perfect. Light ice." "Of course." As she prepared his drink, she kept glancing over at Marcus in 2A. The discrepancy gnawed at her. Mr. Davenport was first class. The man in the hoodie was an anomaly, an error in the matrix of her well-ordered world. Her training, her experience, and her prejudice all coalesced into a single toxic conclusion: something was wrong. She decided to act. With Mr. Davenport's scotch in hand, she took a deliberate detour to seat 2A. She stood over Marcus, forcing him to look up from his book. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her tone clipped and devoid of the warmth she'd just lavished on Mr. Davenport. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Marcus blinked, slightly taken aback. He'd already had it scanned at the gate and shown it to the attendant at the cabin door. But he was a man who preferred to de-escalate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the crumpled pass and handed it to her. Brenda examined it under the cabin light, turning it over as if searching for a flaw. The name read Thorne Marcus. The seat was clearly marked 2A. There was nothing wrong with it. A normal person would have apologized and moved on. Brenda was not a normal person. "This says you're in first class," she stated as if it were an accusation. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice calm and even. "That's correct." "It's just—" She paused, choosing her words with a pretense of delicacy. "We sometimes have passengers who get confused and wander into the wrong cabin. This is a full flight, and we need to make sure everyone is in their assigned seat." The implication was clear. Marcus felt a familiar, weary tightening in his chest. He had dealt with this his entire life. The subtle questioning, the assumption that he didn't belong. He'd been followed in high-end stores, mistaken for a valet at five-star restaurants, and questioned by police in his own wealthy neighborhood. It was a tax he paid for being a black man in America. "I assure you I'm not confused," Marcus said, his eyes holding hers. "I'm in the right seat." For Brenda, his calm defiance was confirmation. In her mind, an innocent person would be flustered apologetic. His composure struck her as arrogance. This was a challenge to her authority. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification to match the name on this ticket," she said, her voice hardening. Now other passengers were starting to notice. The quiet murmur of the cabin began to die down. Mr. Davenport in 3C peered over his seat with unconcealed curiosity. A young woman in 1B Chloe, a VP of marketing from a rival tech firm, lowered her noise-cancelling headphones, her brow furrowed in concern. Marcus sighed internally. This was escalating. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "The problem, sir, is that I need to verify you are the person on this ticket." Brenda snapped back, her professionalism dissolving into raw authority. Some of the other passengers are feeling uncomfortable. The lie hung in the air, thick and poisonous. No other passenger had said a word. She was using them as a shield for her own prejudice. That was the moment something shifted in Marcus. The weariness was replaced by a cold, sharp anger. Not the hot explosive kind, but the focused, crystalline anger of a man who had been pushed 1 inch too far. He slowly reached into his travel wallet and produced his driver's license. "Marcus Thorne," he said, holding it out for her. Brenda barely glanced at it. Her mind was already made up. "This could be a fake," she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. "The ticket could have been stolen. You don't fit the profile." "The profile?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "What profile is that exactly?" Brenda flinched, realizing her mistake. She had said the quiet part out loud. Now she had to double down or admit fault, and admitting fault was not in her nature. "The profile of a first-class passenger," she retorted, her voice rising in panic. "So you are causing a disturbance. I've asked you for simple verification, and you're being difficult. If you don't cooperate, I will have to call security and have you removed from the aircraft." Marcus simply looked at her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He just held her gaze, and in his eyes she saw not fear, but a profound, unnerving disappointment. It was as if a judge was looking at her, weighing her actions on a scale she couldn't see. "Do what you feel you have to do," he said softly. That was it. For Brenda, it was the final nail in the coffin. She saw it as a threat. She turned on her heel, her face a mask of righteous fury, and marched toward the cockpit. "I need security at the gate," she said into the intercom phone, her voice echoing through the now silent cabin. "We have a passenger who is refusing to cooperate. He's a potential security risk." Chloe and 1B gasped. Mr. Davenport leaned back with a smug little smile, as if enjoying the floor show. Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Aegis Dynamics, the man who had just signed a $180 million deal with this very airline, closed his eyes. He wasn't thinking about the humiliation. He wasn't thinking about the anger. He was thinking about cause and effect. He was a systems analyst at heart, and he was watching a system fail in real time. And he knew with absolute certainty that actions have consequences. The arrival of security was swift and uncomfortably public. 2 uniformed airport police officers, a man and a woman, boarded the plane. Their faces were impassive, trained to project authority without immediate aggression. Brenda met them at the door, speaking in a low, urgent tone, pointing dramatically towards seat 2A. "That's him," she said. "He's being belligerent, refusing to show proper ID. The ticket seems fraudulent, and he's making everyone uneasy." The officers walked down the narrow aisle, the silence in the cabin so complete that the click of their holsters seemed amplified. They stopped next to Marcus's seat. The male officer whose name tag read Miller spoke first. "Sir, my name is Officer Miller. This is Officer Sanchez. We've received a report that there's some confusion about your ticket. Could you please come with us to the jet bridge so we can sort this out?" His tone was firm but professional. He wasn't accusing, he was managing. Marcus looked from Officer Miller to Brenda, who stood a few feet behind them, her arms crossed, a vindicated look on her face. He knew protesting here on the plane would only make him look guilty in the eyes of those who wanted to see it. He had a choice: create a loud, messy scene that would end with him being forcibly removed, or play the long game. Marcus Thorne always played the long game. He nodded slowly. "Of course, officer. No problem." He carefully placed his bookmark in his novel, closed it, and set it on his seat. He stood up his 6-2 frame, momentarily filling the space. He didn't look at any of the other passengers. He just looked at the officers. As he began to move into the aisle, a voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, what is going on here?" It was Chloe from seat 1B. She was standing now, her phone held loosely in her hand. She was in her early 30s, with the sharp, analytical eyes of someone who worked in the hyper-competitive world of Silicon Valley. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," Brenda interjected immediately. "This is a security matter." Chloe ignored her completely, her eyes fixed on Officer Miller. "I've been sitting right here. This man has done nothing wrong. He was quiet. He was polite. Your flight attendant here has been harassing him since she laid eyes on him. She asked for his pass. He showed it. She asked for his ID. He showed it. He has been nothing but cooperative. She is the one causing the disturbance." Officer Miller's expression flickered. This complicated his neat narrative. "Ma'am, we appreciate your input, but we need to—" "Do you know who he is?" Chloe pressed, taking a step forward. Her mind was racing. She'd seen his face before, the cover of Wired, a Forbes feature, the photo in the announcement about the Starlight deal. That was it. That's Marcus Thorne. The name just hung there. To Brenda it meant nothing. To Mr. Davenport it sounded vaguely familiar. But to Officer Miller, who had just completed a mandatory cybersecurity briefing for airport staff last month, the name connected to a face from the presentation slides. Aegis Dynamics. Before the officer could process it, the cockpit door opened. Captain Eva Rostova emerged. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a commanding presence and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She had heard the commotion over the intercom, and the word security had brought her out immediately. "What is the situation here?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of ultimate authority on her aircraft. Brenda rushed to her side. "Captain, this passenger was being disruptive. I suspected his ticket was fraudulent, and he refused to properly identify himself. I had to call security for the safety of the cabin." Captain Rostova looked from Brenda's flushed, agitated face to the utterly calm demeanor of Marcus Thorne, who stood silently between the two officers. Then she looked at Chloe, who was vibrating with indignation. The captain was an expert at reading people and situations in seconds. Something was deeply wrong with Brenda's story. "Mr. Thorne," the captain asked, addressing Marcus directly using the name Chloe had provided, "is there anything you'd like to say?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady. "Your flight attendant believes I do not fit the profile for first class. I have shown her my boarding pass and my driver's license. She was not satisfied. I am happy to deplane and resolve this, so your flight can depart on time. I wouldn't want to inconvenience the other passengers." The quiet dignity of his statement was more damning than any accusation. He wasn't fighting. He was yielding in a way that highlighted the absurdity of the situation. Captain Rostova felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She was a company woman, but she was also a fair one. She knew what a lawsuit for racial profiling looked like, and this situation was a textbook example. "Officers," she said, turning to Miller and Sanchez, "thank you for your prompt response. I believe this is a misunderstanding that can be resolved by airline staff. We won't be needing you further." Officer Miller, grateful for the out, nodded. "Understood, Captain." He looked at Marcus. "You're free to go, sir." But Marcus shook his head gently. "No," he said, not to the officers, but to the captain. "Your attendant has identified me as a security risk in front of your entire first-class cabin. She has publicly demanded my removal. I will not stay where I am considered a threat. I will deplane." Captain Rostova's face went pale. This was no longer about de-escalating a situation. This was about managing the catastrophic fallout that was about to occur. "Sir, please," she began. "Let me apologize on behalf of the airline. This is not the standard of service we aspire to." "Brenda," she said, her voice dropping to an icy temperature, "go to the galley. Now." Brenda's face crumpled from self-righteousness into shock. She opened her mouth to protest, but one look from the captain silenced her. She turned and scurried away. "Mr. Thorne, please allow me to personally escort you back to your seat. We can discuss how to make this right," Captain Rostova pleaded. Marcus offered her a small, sad smile. It was a smile of pity, not for himself, but for her. "Captain, some things can't be made right with a complimentary bottle of champagne. The damage is already done." He turned, nodded once to the officers and once to Chloe, in a gesture of thanks, and walked calmly toward the door. He didn't look back. He stepped onto the jet bridge and disappeared from view, his departure, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence in the cabin. Captain Rostova knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she had not just watched a passenger leave her plane. She had watched a nuclear bomb, primed and armed, walk quietly out the door. She immediately went for her comms to call the operations center. This was no longer an in-flight incident. This was a corporate crisis at the highest level. Marcus Thorne walked through the bustling SFO terminal, a ghost in the machine. No one who saw the tall black man in the simple hoodie could have guessed he was about to shift the fortunes of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He found a quiet corner near a departure gate, away from the crowds, and pulled out his phone. He didn't call customer service. He didn't tweet his anger. He made a single phone call to a number on his speed dial. "David," he said when the man on the other end picked up. David Chen was his CFO and longtime friend. "Marcus, aren't you supposed to be in the air? Everything okay?" David's voice was sharp, always alert. "Change of plans," Marcus said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Kill the Starlight deal." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Kill it? What are you talking about?" "The ink is barely dry. We're talking about the public announcement next week. The market will love it." "I don't care," Marcus said. "I want you and legal to activate the termination clause. I believe it's Article 14, Section B, the partner misconduct clause. Draft a letter. No nonsense, no emotion. Aegis Dynamics is exercising its right to terminate agreement SL774 due to a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and conduct that has irreparably damaged our confidence in the Starlight Airlines brand. Something to that effect. Have it ready to send in 1 hour. "Marcus, wait," David pleaded. "What the hell happened? This is $180 million, not to mention the reputational boost. We can't just flush it." "They can keep their signing bonus as a consolation prize," Marcus said coldly. "Just get it done, David, and find me a seat on the next Delta or United flight to JFK. Any class will do." He hung up, leaving his CFO speechless. Meanwhile, at Starlight Airlines' gleaming corporate headquarters in Chicago, CEO Richard Sterling was in a board meeting boasting about his latest coup. Sterling was a man who had inherited his success. He was charming, politically savvy, and looked great in a suit, but he hadn't had a truly original business idea in a decade. The Aegis Dynamics deal was his crown jewel, a move that would finally silence the whispers that he was just a caretaker for the company his father had built. And with Marcus Thorne's AI integration, Sterling was saying, gesturing grandly at a PowerPoint slide, "We're not just catching up to the competition, we're leapfrogging them into the next decade." His phone set on the polished mahogany table buzzed with an urgent notification from his assistant. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Annoyed, he discreetly glanced down. The message read, "Urgent call from Captain Eva Rostova, Flight 88, Code Red." Code Red was a designation reserved for hijackings, crashes, or imminent threats to the airline's existence. Sterling's blood ran cold. He excused himself from the meeting, his confident facade crumbling slightly. "What is it?" he barked into the phone. He listened for 3 minutes as Captain Rostova recounted the incident in terse professional detail. She relayed the flight attendant's actions, Chloe's intervention, and Marcus Thorne's quiet, dignified exit. Sterling's face went from ruddy to ashen. He got off the plane. You let him get off the plane. He refused to stay, Mr. Sterling." The captain replied, her voice tight. "Frankly, I don't blame him. Find him. Get the gate agent to apologize. Offer him a lifetime of free flights. Whatever it takes." Sterling sputtered, panic clawing at his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't think this is about a free flight." Before Sterling could respond, his other line beeped. It was an email notification from his chief legal officer. The subject line was a punch to the gut. "Notice of contract termination. Aegis Dynamics." Sterling's hands began to shake. He opened the email. There it was, in stark, unforgiving legalese. A brief, brutal letter informing him that the $180 million deal was dead. It referenced the partner misconduct clause, a piece of boilerplate he had never imagined would be used against him. He stumbled back into the boardroom looking like he'd seen a ghost. The board members fell silent, their smiles fading. "The Aegis deal," he stammered, holding up his phone as if it were a venomous snake. "It's gone. Thorne killed it." Chaos erupted. "How, why, what happened?" Desperate Sterling scrambled. He needed to talk to someone who knew Thorne, someone who could mediate. He frantically scrolled through his contacts. He knew that Julian Croft, a legendary venture capitalist and a powerful member of the Starlight board, had been an early investor in Aegis Dynamics. Croft was old money, old power, a man who moved in the same rarefied circles as Thorne. He found the number and called. "Richard," Croft's gravelly voice answered. "This better be important." "Julian, it's a catastrophe," Sterling began, his voice cracking. He quickly explained the situation, the flight attendant, the accusation, Marcus Thorne, walking off the plane, and the termination email. He framed it as a terrible misunderstanding by an overzealous employee. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Julian Croft finally spoke, his voice was laced with a contempt so profound it made Sterling flinch. "Richard, do you have any idea who you people just did this to?" Croft asked. "This isn't some hot-headed musician you can placate with an apology and a gift basket. This is Marcus Thorne." "I know who he is," Sterling insisted. "He's the CEO of—" "You know his title, you fool, but you don't know the man." Croft cut him off. "Marcus doesn't run on ego. He runs on principle. He's a man who builds systems, Richard. Systems based on logic and ethics. You just showed him that your system is fundamentally, culturally, and morally broken. He's not going to try to fix your broken system. He's just going to disconnect from it. That contract isn't at risk. It's dead and buried. You might as well have tried to spit on the Mona Lisa." Sterling felt the floor drop out from under him. "What do I do, Julian?" he whispered. "What you should do," Croft said, his voice like chipping granite, "is update your resume. Because you presided over the single most expensive act of employee stupidity in aviation history. You didn't just lose a vendor, Richard. You just told the entire tech industry, an industry built by people who look a lot more like Marcus Thorne than they do like you, that your airline is a hostile environment. Good luck recovering from that." The line went dead. Richard Sterling stood in the hallway, the drone of the air conditioning filling the silence. He was no longer a conquering CEO. He was the captain of a sinking ship, and he had just watched his own crew hand-deliver the torpedo. The initial corporate response at Starlight Airlines was a textbook example of institutional panic. Inside the Chicago headquarters, the atmosphere following Julian Croft's brutal phone call was not one of strategic planning, but of headless chickens scrambling in a burning coop. The $180 million contract termination email was forwarded, re-forwarded, and dissected by legal and finance teams who could only confirm the grim reality. The language was ironclad. The partner misconduct clause, once a piece of forgotten boilerplate, was now a dagger in the company's heart. Richard Sterling, his face pale and slick with sweat, tried to project an authority he no longer felt. "Get our PR team in here." "Now," he barked at his assistant. "And someone get me the full file on the flight attendant. Brenda Jensen. I want to know everything." The PR team, led by a nervous vice president named Tom, rushed in. Their immediate instinct was to smother, not to solve. "We need to issue a holding statement," Tom said, wringing his hands. "Something vague. Starlight Airlines is aware of an incident on Flight 88, and we are conducting a full investigation. We are committed to providing a safe and welcoming environment for all our customers." Standard stuff. Sterling nodded numbly, desperate for any semblance of a plan. But the chief legal officer, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, immediately shot it down. "Absolutely not, Tom. An incident." "You'll sound like you're talking about a spilled coffee. Welcoming environment. The man you threw off the plane is Marcus Thorne, and he's about to tell the entire world just how unwelcoming we are. A vague statement is an admission of guilt without the dignity of a confession. We say nothing until we know the extent of the damage. This was the paralysis that gripped them. The PR team wanted to lie, the legal team advised silence, and the CEO, stripped of his bravado, could only stare at the stock ticker on his computer screen, willing it not to move. While the executives debated, Brenda Jensen was at home, seething with a sense of righteous indignation. A call from her direct supervisor had informed her she was suspended, with pay pending an investigation. Suspended, her after 23 years of loyal service. The injustice of it burned in her chest. She immediately called her union representative, a man named Gary. On the phone, she wove a compelling narrative of victimhood. "Gary, it was terrifying," she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion. This man, he didn't belong. You could just feel it. He was dressed like a thug, and when I questioned him, he got this cold, arrogant look in his eyes. He was trying to intimidate me. I was following protocol, Gary. The training says if we feel a situation is unsafe, we act. I felt unsafe. I feared for the safety of my cabin and my crew. Now they're suspending me for doing my job. It's his word against mine, and I'm the one in uniform. Gary, accustomed to defending employees, listened sympathetically. "Don't you worry, Brenda. They can't do this. We'll file a grievance. They have to prove you acted with malicious intent, which is impossible. You stick to your story. You felt threatened. That's the magic phrase." Brenda hung up the phone, a wave of relief washing over her. The union would protect her. The company would protect her. She had dedicated her life to Starlight Airlines. They wouldn't throw her to the wolves over some entitled passenger in a hoodie who probably got the ticket with frequent flyer miles. She, Captain Rostova, and the entire executive floor at Starlight had all made the same critical miscalculation. They believed the incident was contained within the aluminum walls of the aircraft. They had forgotten about the silent, connected world and the articulate witness in seat 1B. Chloe Harris, the tech VP, landed at JFK, the injustice she had witnessed churning like acid in her gut. As a woman in the male-dominated tech industry, she was keenly sensitive to bias and abuse of power. What she saw done to Marcus Thorne, a man whose intellect and success she deeply respected, was more than just rude. It was a profound violation. Sitting in the back of her Uber, stuck in traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway, she knew she couldn't stay silent. She considered Twitter but dismissed it. Too chaotic, too prone to devolving into a shouting match. She needed a weapon of precision. She needed to hit Starlight Airlines in its soul, in its professional reputation. She opened LinkedIn. With focused anger, she began to type, carefully constructing her story, not just as an outraged passenger, but as a professional observer and a member of the community they had so grievously offended. Her post was longer and more detailed than a simple tweet. She set the scene described Brenda's fawning over Mr. Davenport and contrasted it with the immediate hostile interrogation of Marcus. She quoted Brenda's damning phrases, "You don't fit the profile," making other passengers uncomfortable, and highlighted Marcus's superhuman calm. Then came the kill shot. But the most important detail is this: the man she chose to humiliate is Marcus Thorne. Yes, that Marcus Thorne, the founder of Aegis Dynamics, a man whose keynote at last year's World Economic Forum was about building ethical AI to combat systemic bias. And the ultimate irony, he was on that flight, because he had just finalized a 9-figure deal to save Starlight from its own technological obsolescence. He wasn't just a first-class passenger Starlight Airlines, he was your lifeline, and your employee, operating under the culture you have created, severed that line with the dull knife of her own prejudice. I am a VP in this industry. We see this. We talk about this. And we make decisions based on this. The tech world is watching. And we have very long memories. She tagged Starlight Airlines. She used the hashtags Starlight Shame, Bias in the Skies, and Hot Marcus Thorne. Then she hit post. The post didn't go viral. It detonated. The first wave of shares came from her own network, other VPs, engineers, and marketers in Silicon Valley. Within an hour, it was picked up by major tech influencers and CEOs. A famed venture capitalist shared it with the comment, "This is a case study in how to lose 180 million and your corporate soul in a single flight." The founder of a multi-billion-dollar software company added, "If this is how Starlight Airlines treats one of the most respected black leaders in our industry, I'm taking my company's business elsewhere, effective immediately." By the time Richard Sterling woke up the next morning, his phone was a smoldering crater of notifications. The LinkedIn post was the lead story on TechCrunch and was being discussed on CNBC. And Starlight stock sell was in absolute freefall. The pre-market trading looked like a ski slope. By the time the opening bell rang, it had gapped down 12%. Over $500 million in shareholder value had been incinerated overnight. The emergency board meeting was convened not as a discussion, but as a trial. Richard Sterling walked in, armed with useless platitudes about taking swift action. But the board members, led by a stone-faced Julian Croft, were having none of it. "Richard, shut up and listen." Croft began, his voice dangerously low. He projected Chloe's LinkedIn post onto the main screen. "This is what the world is reading. She didn't just report an incident. She wrote our obituary. You were given a code red warning from your captain, and you did nothing. You allowed this fire to smolder for hours, and now it's a 6-alarm blaze. You have failed as a leader, as a crisis manager, and as a steward of this company." "Julian, it was one employee," Sterling pleaded, his voice cracking. "A rogue flight attendant. A rogue flight attendant who felt empowered by the culture you curated," Croft roared, standing up. "A culture that values the comfort of a man like Davenport over the dignity of a man like Thorne. You didn't build that culture, Richard, but you sure as hell let it fester. The market isn't punishing us for a rude flight attendant. It's punishing us for a decade of complacent, tone-deaf leadership. It's punishing us for you." The vote was a mere formality. By noon, Starlight Airlines announced the board had accepted Richard Sterling's resignation, effective immediately. The corporate karma had struck. Now it was time for the personal. Brenda Jensen's name inevitably was leaked. An anonymous Starlight baggage handler, disgusted by what he'd heard, sent a copy of the flight manifest to a hungry blogger. Within hours, Brenda's photo, her address, and her phone number were circulating on the darkest corners of the internet. The union grievance she had filed became a public joke. Starlight, under new and terrified interim leadership, expedited its investigation and fired her via a cold formal letter citing gross misconduct and actions bringing the company into severe disrepute. Her life imploded. Her quiet suburban street was choked with news vans. Her phone rang incessantly with threats and hate-filled tirades. She and her husband Mark became prisoners in their own home. The final devastating blow came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Her husband Mark sat at their kitchen table, staring blankly at a legal letter. He was a caterer, and his company's crown jewel was an exclusive multi-million-dollar annual contract with Google's Bay Area campus. He'd just gotten off the phone with his primary contact, a senior executive named Alicia Rhodes. "What is it?" Brenda asked, her voice raspy from crying. Mark looked up at her, and for the first time she didn't see anger or frustration in his eyes. She saw a terrifying emptiness. "That was Alicia. From Google," he said, his voice hollow. She was very polite. said my service has always been impeccable. But she also saw the news. She saw your name, Brenda. She saw what you did to Marcus Thorne. He took a shaky breath. Alicia is a black woman, Brenda. Her team, the ones who loved my food, who championed my business. Half of them are people of color. She said Google cannot in good conscience do business with a company so closely associated with an act of such profound and public bigotry. Their vendor ethics clause. They're terminating the contract. Brenda stared at him, uncomprehending. But that's not fair. That's your business. I didn't do anything to them. You did. Mark finally yelled, slamming his fist on the table, the letter rattling. Don't you see? You did it to all of us. That contract was 80% of our revenue. It paid for this house. It paid for the kids' college funds. It paid for everything. You looked at a man in a hoodie and you saw a threat. I look at you, and I see the person who just destroyed our entire life because you couldn't stand the thought of a black man sitting in first class. The reality finally crashed through Brenda's wall of self-pity. This wasn't just about a lost job or a sullied reputation. Her single 5-minute act of prejudice hadn't just ended a career. It had reached out and poisoned the well of her family's future, bankrupting them financially and morally. The quiet, comfortable world she thought she was protecting had been utterly annihilated by her own hand. The karma wasn't just harsh, it was total. In the deafening silence that followed the corporate executions and public disgrace, the world's attention turned to the man at the center of the storm. The media, having tasted blood with the ousting of a CEO and the viral immolation of a flight attendant, was insatiable. Every major news network from CNN to Bloomberg relentlessly pursued an exclusive interview with Marcus Thorne. They wanted to see his anger, to hear his demands, to cast him in the convenient role of the wronged victim finally claiming his pound of flesh. They were all left waiting. Marcus, true to his nature, refused to engage in the spectacle. He understood that a television interview would frame the narrative around emotion and personality. He wanted to frame it around something far more important: systems. When he finally broke his silence, it was not under the hot lights of a television studio, but in the cool, measured text of a post on the Aegis Dynamics company blog. The post, titled "On Systems, People and Principles," was published on a Tuesday morning and landed with the force of a scholarly treatise in the middle of a bar fight. It was meticulously crafted, devoid of personal animosity, yet devastating in its clinical precision. In recent days, there has been significant public discourse surrounding an incident on a Starlight Airlines flight. The post began. While the experience was deeply unpleasant on a personal level, its true significance is not personal. It is systemic. For many people in this country and around the world facing suspicion and prejudice in spaces where they have every right to be, is not a shocking anomaly. It is a recurring tax on their existence. The focus on a single employee or even a single CEO misses the point. The most dangerous flaw isn't a faulty component, it's a corrupted design. He continued, laying out his argument like an engineer diagnosing a critical failure. A system that empowers its agents to operate on subjective profiles rather than objective reality is a system destined for failure. This is true whether the system is landing a plane, securing a network, or simply checking a passenger's ticket. Bias is a bug. It introduces random, unjust variables that degrade performance and erode trust. In the world of technology, we spend billions of dollars to hunt down and eliminate bugs in our code. We should be just as relentless in hunting down and eliminating the bugs in our corporate cultures. Aegis Dynamics was founded on the principles of integrity, security, and impartiality. Our algorithms and security protocols are designed to be agnostic, to protect data and infrastructure based on verifiable credentials, not on assumptions or appearances. We cannot, in good conscience, integrate our systems with a partner organization until it demonstrates a fundamental, verifiable commitment to these same principles. Therefore, the decision to terminate our contract with Starlight Airlines was not punitive. It was a logical necessity. We cannot build a secure digital future on a foundation riddled with the malware of human prejudice. This is a moment for reflection, not just for Starlight Airlines, but for every organization in every industry. Who do you empower? What behaviors do you tolerate through inaction? What are the hidden bugs in your own source code? Fix those and you'll be building something that is truly first class. The rest is just window dressing. The statement was a masterstroke of strategic communication. Tech journalists and Silicon Valley leaders hailed it as a manifesto. A prominent venture capitalist tweeted, "Marcus Thorne didn't just win a PR battle. He reframed the entire debate from customer service to corporate ethics. Required reading for every CEO." The old guard of corporate America was less comfortable. They saw a man who had turned a personal slight into a billion-dollar corporate philosophy, a dangerous precedent. But they could not argue with his logic. He hadn't thrown a tantrum. He had presented a diagnosis. The board of Starlight Airlines, now operating from a position of profound weakness, understood they were at a crossroads. Their brand was toxic. Their stock was wounded. Their internal culture stood exposed as archaic and discriminatory. The old playbook of quiet settlements and internal memos was utterly useless. They needed a revolution. The emergency board meeting to find a new CEO was tense. Some of the older members argued for a steady hand, a veteran from a rival airline who could calm the markets. But Julian Croft, the venture capitalist who had warned Richard Sterling of his folly, slammed his hand on the table. A steady hand to pilot us straight into the iceberg. "No," he thundered. "We don't need a manager. We need a warrior. We need someone who runs toward fires, not away from them. We need someone who understands that the culture you all have so carefully curated is now our single greatest liability." He pushed a portfolio across the table. "We need Angelie Sharma." The name silenced the room. Angelie Sharma was a legend in the world of corporate restructuring. She was known as the Lioness, a brilliant, formidable executive who had taken 3 different failing companies in deeply troubled industries and not only saved them, but transformed them. She was a woman of color, the daughter of immigrants, and she had a reputation for having zero tolerance for incompetence and institutional rot. She was in every way the antithesis of Richard Sterling. She was a risk. She was exactly what they needed. Angelie Sharma's first act as the new CEO was not to call Marcus Thorne. It was to call a company-wide all-hands-on-deck town hall streamed to every employee globally, from the tarmac crews in Dallas to the reservations agents in Manila. She walked onto the stage in a simple, sharp business suit, projecting an aura of unflinching authority. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Angelie Sharma, and I am your new CEO. Let's not waste time with pleasantries. Our house is on fire." What happened to Marcus Thorne was not an incident. It was a betrayal. It was a betrayal of our customers, a betrayal of our values, and a betrayal of the basic human decency that should be the bedrock of any service company. Brenda Jensen was the agent of that betrayal, and Richard Sterling was the enabler. They are gone. But the sickness that allowed them to flourish is not. She paced the stage, making eye contact with the camera. For too long we have operated on a culture of who you know and what you look like. That ends today. I am announcing a top-to-bottom, no stone unturned audit of our culture, our training, and our policies. We are partnering with the nation's leading DEI firm, not for a 2-hour webinar, but for a multi-year program to rebuild our DNA. We will introduce scenario-based training, using the Flight 88 incident as our core case study of catastrophic failure. We will overhaul our customer feedback systems to flag and escalate any complaint involving bias. And promotions will now be tied to new metrics of leadership that include fairness and inclusivity. If this makes you uncomfortable, I would respectfully suggest that Starlight Airlines is no longer the right company for you. Then she addressed the man at the center of it all. To Mr. Marcus Thorne. She said, her tone shifting from stern to respectful. I offer my unreserved apology. But I know that apologies are words, and you are a man who deals in actions. Therefore, I will not insult you by asking for your business. I will instead ask for your scrutiny. My office will be reaching out to your foundation, not for a donation, but to ask if you would consider advising us to be a paid consultant in our efforts to become a company worthy of your principles. We want to earn back your trust, not just your contract. The speech was a thunderclap. It signaled that this was not a cosmetic fix. This was radical surgery. 3 months passed. 3 months of grueling, relentless work for Angelie. She was a whirlwind, meeting with every department, gutting inefficient and biased processes, and promoting new diverse leaders. Finally, the meeting she had been working towards was granted. It took place not in Starlight's opulent headquarters or Aegis's futuristic campus, but in a small glass-walled conference room at a non-profit tech incubator in a gentrifying neighborhood of Oakland, a project Marcus's foundation had funded to support minority entrepreneurs. The setting was intentional. It was Marcus's turf, a space built on the principles he espoused. Angelie arrived alone, with a simple tablet in her hand. Marcus was already there, nursing a cup of black coffee. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans. The power dynamic was clear. "Ms. Sharma," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Thorne, the pleasure is mine, and please call me Angelie." She didn't launch into a sales pitch. She launched into a data-driven report. Our internal review identified 147 informal policies and common practices that allowed for discriminatory behavior to go unchecked. We have eliminated 112 of them. The remaining 35 are being rewritten with oversight from our new ethics committee. She began. She walked him through the new training modules, the anonymous employee reporting system she'd implemented, the change in the demographic makeup of her senior VPs. For every point she made, Marcus asked a sharp, probing question. "How are you measuring the efficacy of the training? Self-reporting is notoriously unreliable." "We're not," Angelie countered smoothly. "We're tracking it with performance. We've tied senior management bonuses to a 30% reduction in customer complaints related to bias and a 25% increase in promotion rates for underrepresented employees. The training is just the tool. The results are what matter." He was impressed. She wasn't just talking about change. She was engineering it. She understood systems. She was a fellow architect. After an hour, he leaned back, looking at her with a newfound respect. "You've done more in 3 months than your predecessor did in 10 years. "It's a start," she said, her voice betraying a hint of the immense pressure she was under. "But it's just a foundation. We have to prove we can build on it." The $180 million contract for a full systems overhaul is still off the table, Angelie. Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. A partnership of that magnitude requires years of proven trust, not months of promising effort. Angelie nodded, her face a mask of controlled disappointment. She had expected it. but it still stung. I understand. However, Marcus continued, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. The archaic, insecure, and frankly insulting in-flight entertainment system you're currently running is a significant liability. It's a gaping security hole, and the user interface is an affront to good design. A genuine laugh escaped Angelie's lips, a release of pent-up tension. You don't have to tell me. I tried to use it last week. I think my daughter's toy laptop has more processing power. My R&D team has a new lightweight, ultra-secure media platform in beta. It's designed for closed networks, Marcus said, leaning forward. It requires a partner who is agile, committed, and willing to be scrutinized. We could deploy it on a single route. Let's say SFO to JFK, a pilot program. Call it a $5 million getting to know you project, a proof of concept. We'll see how your new corporate culture and our new technology work together. Angelie Sharma's eyes widened. It wasn't the money. The $5 million was a rounding error. It was the principle. It was the door once slammed shut being cracked open an inch. It was a chance not for forgiveness, but for redemption. It was a probationary partnership, a tangible symbol that while trust was a fragile thing, it was not always irreparable. We accept, she said, her voice filled with a determination that matched his own. We won't let you down. Marcus Thorne stood up and extended his hand. He hadn't just gotten an apology. He hadn't just caused a reckoning. He had used his immense power not simply to punish a flawed system, but to become the architect of a better one. The karma that had cascaded down from his seat in first class wasn't just destructive, it had cleared the ground for new construction. So was this justice, or was it revenge? Marcus Thorne had the power to ruin a company, but instead he forced it to become better. Brenda Jensen's single act of prejudice didn't just end her career. It triggered a chain reaction that exposed a rotten culture and cost her family everything she thought she was protecting. It's a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, the consequences of our actions can ripple out in ways we can never predict, hitting not just our professional lives, but the very core of our personal ones. What would you have done in Marcus's position? What would you have done if you were the witness, Chloe? Is this a story about the power of money or the power of principle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story made you think, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. You won't want to miss our next deep dive into the moments where life delivers its most powerful karma.